till att börja med. Jag inleder lite kort på svenska, men sen så kommer vår gäst Asso Hassan Zadeh att tala på engelska. Hjärtligt välkomna hit allesammans. Vi kunde höra på nyheterna i morse om det som hände i Saudiarabien där drönare attackerade oljeanläggningar och raffinaderier. Ett väldigt stort komplex, vilket innebär att stora delar av Saudiarabiens oljeexport nu är helt pausad. Nästan 6 miljoner fat olja per dag. Och anklagelserna riktas från flera olika håll då mot den iranska regimen. Och vi har sett mycket annat som har ökat spänningarna den senaste tiden i Mellanösternregionen. Och det gör ju givetvis att frågan om Iran, om den iranska regimen, om vad som händer i Mellanösternregionen är väldigt viktig att diskutera nu och analysera, och att omvärlden också kan ge en respons på detta. Men samtidigt, under ytan, så pågår ju ett kontinuerligt förtryck i Iran av den inhemska befolkningen och inte minst också av landets minoriteter, den kurdiska befolkningen och även flera andra folkgrupper, baluchis, araber, azeri, turkar och så vidare. Och därför känns det väldigt viktigt att vi, när nu Iran är på något sätt på den globala dagordningen med fokus på kärnvapen, på de här drönarattackerna, på kriget i Syrien och Jemen och så vidare, att vi också förmår att också se vad händer i Iran och hur behandlas landets egen befolkning. Ofta kommer de frågorna om mänskliga rättigheter i skymundan när stora frågor på den globala dagordningen tonas upp. And we are very glad that Mr. Where are you? Here. Here you are. Mr. Asso Hassan Zadeh is with us today, and Mr. Hassan Zadeh, he is Deputy Secretary General of the political party Kurdistan Democratic Party in Iran. A big party with a long history of both promoting human rights and democracy in the Kurdish areas in Iran, and also time to time being very pressured by the regime, which also has led to that the headquarters of the party cannot be in Iran anymore. So they are basically based on the other side of the border in Iraqi Kurdistan. And Mr. Asso Hassan Zadeh is also he is spokesperson for the Politburo in the party. So what he says is actually also often the official remarks from the party. And the film we wanted to start the show, should we show it all or a few minutes from it?
We can take a few minutes.
A few minutes of this film. This is about what happened 1 year ago, and many people, most of the people around the world are not even aware of what happened. But what happened 1 year ago was that the Iranian regime launched a missile attack right to the buildings where the Kurdistan Democratic Party in Iran had a board meeting. And they killed 15 people, and adjacent to the building was a refugee camp, or is a refugee camp. So actually, what we have seen here is that one state is attacking a political dissident party which are based in another state on the other side of the border with missiles. And killing 15 people, or 15, 16 even, I think it was, and also wounded up to 50 people, even children, in this attack. And there were not so many condemnations, and this issue were not really handled by the international community the way it should be. So we want to start with showing a few minutes from that, just to commemorate the victims, and also that we fresh up our memories of what has happened. Fredrik, with Kurdish origin, who have relatives who were attacked and wounded. One of my best friends, for example, his fiance's father was injured in this attack in Iranian Kurdistan. or on the Iraqi side of the border. So actually it's also an issue of Sweden and Sweden as a multicultural society and diverse society, that we also should be very aware that we have citizens in our country who are still being oppressed and attacked, or their relatives are being that, just because of their political struggle, or actually even their ethnicity or religion. Mr. Hassan Zadeh, please, we welcome you up here, and you will speak for around 20 minutes.
A little less.
Yeah, a little less than that. And
Yes.
after that, there will be time for questions also. Okay, thank you.
Thank you,
And
Fredrik.
most welcome to the Swedish Parliament.
Thank you. Oh, sorry for speaking English. I'm really honored to be in this prestigious place to speak about the Iranian Kurds and their legitimate struggle. Thank you for coming. Thanks also to our liberal friends, especially Fredrik Malm, for organizing this event. Upon my arrival, I was told that it is the first ever event devoted to Iranian Kurdistan taking place here in the Swedish Parliament. I suppose that you are all pretty familiar with the Kurdish question. A few decades ago, very few people in Europe really were conscious about the existence of a nation and a country called the Kurds and Kurdistan. Today, almost everybody knows the Kurdish question, at least in its main features, as the quest for self-determination, including in the forms of autonomy or federalism, of a nation whose territory has been divided against its will twice in history. This global awareness of the Kurdish cause in the world is due to, of course, to the struggle of our people and to the opportunities of the new world and the new realities of the international relations, but it is also due to the attention paid by some European countries, including Sweden, to the plight of our people. And that deserves really my gratitude and our gratitude. Yet the attention paid to the Kurdish question and Kurds in all parts of Kurdistan, I should admit, is not the same. For reasons related to history, to the nature of power, to international circumstances related to our region and to Iran, the Iranian Kurdistan is the part of Kurdistan that receives the least attention. While it's the second largest part of Kurdistan, with a population equal to that of Sweden, even more. So this is not really normal. There was a time when the center of gravity of the whole Kurdish movement was in Iranian Kurdistan. It's in Iranian Kurdistan that at the end of World War II, the first and only Kurdish republic of history was created. That republic was short-lived, but it inspired the modern national identity of all Kurds. I can also mention the aftermath of the Iranian Revolution in 1979, when our people regained its freedom and our political organizations were in charge, had the control of Kurdish territories. But here again, the new regime did not tolerate neither our ethnic aspiration nor the democratic and progressive vision that we had for the rest of Iran. And facing the offensive launched by the Islamic Republic against our population, we had no other choice left than resuming resistance. Our party, KDP Iran, has always showed its preference for the political means and for the peaceful solution of the Kurdish question in Iran. But our party is still banned in Iran. And not only our members, also civil activists inside Iranian Kurdistan are under constant threat. The Iranian Kurdistan is the part of Iran with the highest number of arrests and execution. This is the only part of Iran that the execution of political prisoners still take place. The Kurdish language is still forbidden in public education and more generally in the public sphere. The region remains underdeveloped, and the Iranian security forces take daily the lives of even people called Kolbers, who are people trying to cross borders, and they are carriers who carries goods across the borders in order to earn their lives. So this is the situation. Today, the Iranian regime pretends once again to be ready to engage in political dialogue with us. I would like to inform you that for several months, some sort of preparatory talks between our political parties of Iranian Kurdistan and the Islamic Republic of Iran are initiated with the mediation of an institution of one of your neighboring countries. But meanwhile, the Islamic regime intensifies its repression against our population and our political organizations. This month, September, is charged with many sad episodes for us. It's in September that 40 years ago, the Islamic regime started to implement the fatwa of jihad launched by Ayatollah Khomeini against our people. Almost 10 years later, it's also in September that massive execution of political prisoners took place. Many of them were Kurdish political prisoners. It's also in September that, today, September 17th, Dr. Sharaf Kandi, our Secretary General, was assassinated in Berlin 27 years ago. Sharaf Kandi replaced Dr. Gassemlu, our previous Secretary General, who was assassinated in Vienna in 1989 while negotiating with the Iranian emissaries a peaceful solution to the Kurdish question. I'm very honored by the presence here of Mr. Thomas Hammerberry. I still remember his brilliant speech at the funerals of Dr. Gassemlu, right 30 years ago. Since that time, unfortunately, apart from the struggle that continued, nothing has changed as for the plight lived by our Kurdish people in Iran. And this week, we are honoring the memory of 16 of our friends and our colleagues, many of them members of our families, our relatives, who were killed in the Iranian missile attack on our headquarters on 8th of September last year. At a time when the issue of state terrorism and the question of ballistic missile program of the Iranian regime is almost the only issue on which both Americans and Europeans do agree, we found it curious that, as mentioned by Fredrik a few minutes ago, this attack had no serious international reaction. The international reaction was very weak. And our members and their families in Iraqi Kurdistan are still under threat of such crimes from the Iranian forces right now. I would like to devote most of the time to your questions. That's why I would like to end by saying a few words precisely about the international approach towards Iran. I fully understand that European countries, Sweden and other European countries, have their own priorities. They first pursue their national interests. It's also normal that the point of view adopted towards each part of Kurdistan is not identical. But if we think in long run, I think European countries should adopt a coherent approach towards the Kurdish question as a whole. Not only because it's about the same nation or the same issue, but also because between the question of Kurdish rights in all parts of Kurdistan and the issue of peace and stability in the Middle East, with all its consequences on national security and immigration and humanitarian consequences for European countries, especially Sweden, there is one single linking and decisive element, which is the role of Iran in the region. As mentioned by Fredrik, nowadays unprecedented tensions have risen in the region with risk of military confrontation between Iran and the United States, with the in which the most significant development was the bombing of the oil fields in Saudi Arabia. At the same time, we are witnessing efforts for mediation in order to reach a new deal with Iran. From some European countries, especially France. We as Kurds in Iran and the Center of Coordination of Political Parties in Iranian Kurdistan, we are for more pressure on the Iranian regime. But we think that the international approach towards this regime should not be reduced just to a dilemma between war on one side and the continuation of the statu quo on the other side. A statu quo which is, with which neither the Iranian population nor the civilized world is not comfortable. In order to get out of this dilemma, it's important to give us more visibility in the international arena. Although we are non-state actors, I think the third way is to finally and frankly try to see what the Iranian population and the nationalities of Iran want for the future of their country and their relations with the rest of the world, and try to associate and involve the moderate and progressive and democratic forces of Iran, especially political organizations of the Iranian Kurdistan. You know, nowadays we hear a lot about the democracy in the Middle East as a utopia. I don't know to what extent is that true, but in any event, there is a truth that we cannot escape. We will never have a regime in Iran that will behave in a responsible manner on the international level if this regime is not first accountable to its own people. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yes.
Observe the time.
Of course, you did it much better than I did. We have 23 minutes. Actually, I would start to say that it's very inspiring to listen to you, but also it is so sad that the reaction from the rest of the world is so weak or silent on these issues.
Well, the case was mentioned by the United States permanent envoy to United
the missile
Nations in the Security Council meeting, but apart from the rhetoric of some Eastern countries, the effective reaction was not weak. It did not exist at all. Yeah.
But what can a country like Sweden do for supporting not only people in Iranian Kurdistan, but also in other parts of Iran, regardless of ethnicity or religion and so on? What can we do?
Well, as I mentioned, the Iranian Kurdistan is the most neglected part of Kurdistan. You know, the Kurdish factor is now taken into account, especially after the war with ISIS. But still, the attention paid to our Kurdish people in Iran is very weak. Well, we can do many things. The event that you have organized is some sort of measures that Swedish authorities or our friends in Sweden can take in order to give us a say in the international arena, in order to give us more visibility. I think there is many mechanisms of associating non-state actors like ours, which are politically feasible and legally acceptable, as we have seen that in many cases in Yugoslavia, in Syria. Why not for the Iranian Kurds as well? Second, I think that the Swedish government can play a role with the initiative of Swedish MPs in order to define another foreign policy of the European Union. I know that the foreign policy is the field in which European countries are most divided, but we need another foreign policy towards Iran. No new deal with Iran which is focused only on security files, nuclear deal. Nuclear deal and ballistic missiles program is very important, of course. But there are other issues also. I think you have to put, to include the question of human rights and democracy and rights of our nationalities and the rights of Kurdish people in the talks and in the political developments related to Iran in the European country. And third, I think there are many things to do as to try to assist us in protecting our people. Inside Iranian Kurdistan, there are many cases of human rights violations. Executions still continue. And as I said, our population, our people, our members in Iraqi Kurdistan are still under threat. We have some families of our victims of the last year attack. I'm trying to bring their case into the attention of French and other European authorities in order to try to see how can they help them, including by relocating them in third countries, for example. This is example of measures that can be taken by European countries, especially our Swedish friends.
Thank you. Thank you. We open up the floor for questions or remarks. Actually, in Kurdish or English or Swedish, it doesn't really matter. We can handle the translation. Ja, varsågod. Lotta Fornarve, also Deputy Speaker of the Swedish Parliament as well.
Yes, thank you for coming, Madam.
So, thank you very much for this very interesting seminar. Also, when it comes to gender equality, what's your party's view on gender equality and the situation for female Kurdish citizens? Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. I'm honored to see you here among us. As for the first question, just a few hours before the attack, 3 of the political and civil prisoners, civil activist prisoners in Iran were executed. Right now we have, well, it's not easy to establish a reliable statistics about how many are they, but according to our informations, we have 700 to 800 political Iranian Kurdish political prisoners. Only those who are sentenced to sentences higher than 2 years imprisonment. Many of them are sentenced to life imprisonment, and we have right now up to 30 political prisoners in Iran sentenced to death penalty. This is the situation, and I know even when the Iranian regime accepts to engage in dialogue as for the fate of our prisoners, they do not keep their word, as in the case of those 3 prisoners. They promised not to kill them, they finally executed them. The work is not easy, but the most you talk about it, the better it is for the fate of those prisoners, of course. As for gender equality, well, I suppose it was not easy even in Sweden. It's much more difficult in the Middle East, but gender equality is one of the top priorities of our party. For 12 years, systematically in our Congress and our conferences of the party, we decided to devote at least 20 to 25% of the decision-making bodies to women. We have an organization devoted to the question of women's rights. In the attack, 2 of the women, Sohaila was member of the leadership of our party and Secretary General of the women organization, and Nasrin was her predecessor. They were both killed. So it's an ongoing and eternal question in the Middle East, in our societies. Female Peshmergas are many in our ranks. It's not always for them to be at the same time a woman and a Kurd and a political activist, but in any case, we do our best to improve their situation, and this is a field also in which I think European institutions can assist our Kurdish people in Iran and our political organizations.
Thank you. Please, Mr. Rudi. Aposella. Varsågod.
Tack så mycket för att du har, jag ska prata svenska, tack så mycket för att för din initiativ, Fredrik. Det är väldigt bra, det är glädjande att vi fick lite information av KDP:s representation. Jag tackar för Kurdistans demokratiska partis presentation också i Sverige. Min fråga är att för ungefär 35 år sedan, jag och Thomas Hammarberg, vi jobbade tillsammans. Vi har anordnat vi bildade en kommitté. Den kommittén hette Svenska kommittén för kurdernas mänskliga rättigheter. Efter 30 år fortfarande Sverige, staten som stat, ställning är bara kurdfrågan som är inte politisk fråga, som är en mänsklig fråga. Och de räknas inom ramen i mänskliga rättigheter. Som riksdagsledamöter, det finns socialdemokrater, moderater och Fredrik, ni är olika partier. Allihopa, flesta av dem är kurdvänner. De har arbetat för kurdfrågor inom flera år. Vad ska ni göra för att kunna förändra den här ställningen när det gäller kurdfrågan? Tack.
Tack så mycket, Rudi. Actually, Mr. Hassan Zadeh, it was not really a question for you, but more a question for me and the other members of parliament in the room. But what Mr. Rudi Raweh or Apo Salam, all Kurds have two names, one in parliament and one in the mountains. Okay, but anyway, he told us that 30 years ago, together with Mr. Hammarberg here, they founded the Swedish Committee for Human Rights in Kurdistan, or human rights everywhere. Yeah, for human rights, and that still the Kurdish issue is more or less viewed as an issue of human rights, but not only that. Somehow the other dimensions, what could be territory or self-determination and or even independence and so on, are often not in. When the Western government calculates on this issue, it's easy to.
Issue, but not only human
rights. Yeah. And also he asked what Swedish politicians can do in order to raise the awareness of the Kurdish situation, more or less. Well, we have to work harder, basically. And I think that the Kurdish diaspora in Sweden has played a very important role in lifting up these issues. It's a very the Kurdish group in Sweden, the Kurdish community in Sweden is very politically mobilized. Also, many Iranians in general are very politically mobilized in Sweden. It comes from, I guess, that many people are political refugees. If people come as laborers in the 50s, they might care more about football than politics. But for political refugees, it's like in the DNA to be active. And also, of course, they get kids in Sweden who go to universities here and start to be very active and so on in the issues, which is very important to pressure Swedish politicians to take a bigger to take more action. I think it's the same in other European countries, in the United States and other countries as well. Well, do we have more? Har vi fler frågor? Varsågod, Mikael.
We can all agree that this regime of Iran is a terrible murderous regime, but it's very unpopular by the Iranian people, this regime, I assume. At least all the Iranian people I met in Sweden are very much against it. How can we hit this regime without making it too hard for the ordinary Iranian people? That would I like to hear.
Thank you for being here, sir. Thank you for your question. Well, in face of regimes like the Islamic Republic, nothing is easy. The Iranian population is the hostage of the Iranian regime, actually. It's always preferable to resolve the issues of this world peacefully and through dialogue. But at the same time, it's sad to say and to admit that in our region, usually changes occur through war. I'm not calling for war, in my speech, I tried to say there are third ways, a third vision of how to help the Iranian population. But, for example, if you take the case of the instance of the sanctions, it hit first the Iranian population. I have a few knowledge about how what's called smart sanctions work. Usually doesn't work. There are no smart sanctions in the case of countries like Iran, because in order to put the most pressure on the Iranian regime, you have to cut off its main source of money, which is petrol, which is the oil. So, and it does affect when the most part of the Iranian budget depends on those resources. Naturally, it does affect the everyday life of the population. So, well, we can always imagine solutions that hit less the population, including the smart sanctions. But I think the Iranian population is ready to pay the price, to have tougher times for a while in order to get rid of this regime. So I am not at all for lifting the pressure on this regime, including by economic sanctions and other ways of pressuring this regime. Thank you.
Thank you. Thomas, varsågod.
Thank you, and thank you very much for coming
Thank
here.
you for coming, sir.
It's important, and I do hope that the Swedish media will take this opportunity to listen to you and also to give some attention to this problem, because you are absolutely right that the issue is not really highlighted in this country and other countries in the rest of Europe. So that is very important. Sweden, in fact, is privileged by the fact that we have a fairly large diaspora, the Kurdish diaspora in this country. And you could even see in the parliament that the diaspora is widely represented here in several parties, and makes it possible for us to see this as a common concern, not something where we've tried to hit one another in sort of party political game. But this is an issue where we should be, and I think we are today, unified in the support. But still, too little is done. And I think you are very right to emphasize the European Union could do much more than it does so far. Even United Nations and some of the bodies there, including those who monitor human rights, could do much more than they do today. And we should push for that. So that's important. So I have only one question. You said in passing that there is some kind of an effort going on between a neighbor country to us, I guess who it is, which it is, and yourself and the government in Tehran. Would it be possible to mention a bit more there? And is this attempt something of interest also for us here, and can we contribute to this?
Thank you, Mr. Thomas Hammerberry, for being here again. I'm really honored to see you finally, 30 years later. Well, as for your remarks, I can only fully agree with all what you said. You know, between us and the Swedish and European peoples, it's not only about shared values. We have the same values as you all. It's also about shared interest. Because of, as I said, because of the humanitarian consequences of the conflict in the Middle East. You know, a new war in Iranian Kurdistan, a new Rojava in Iranian Kurdistan, with all the new waves of refugees, is not excluded. It's not in the interest of the Swedish country, nor in our interest. So that's why it's about a shared interest. As for your question, well, we always said that there is no military solution to the Kurdish question. That's why even facing, in the case of a regime like the Islamic Republic of Iran, we always said that we are ready, in principle, to engage in peaceful talks. But the first time after the revolution, when negotiations took place between the Kurdish delegation and the Iranian regime, it was just a tactic for the Iranian regime to gain time to re-attack and regain control of the Kurdish territories. Second time, it was in 1989 in Vienna. Mm-hmm. Their aim was only to kill Dr. Gasmedou, your friend. But this time, well, the Iranian regime is under international pressure and facing unprecedented protests inside Iran. 1 year and a half ago, that institution from Scandinavia initiated those talks. And we did accept. Till now, 2 to 3 rounds of talks took place. We cannot call them real negotiations. It is just talks in order to establish a framework for future negotiations. There are many positive elements in this process. It's the first time that an international credible institution is mediating. The Iranian regime is represented in a high level there. The Vice Foreign Ministry is heading their delegation, and our political organizations are acting all together in this process.